Okay, good evening. Good evening. I'm Jim Brulé, I'm a Magid, a spiritual storyteller, and this is the third in our series of stories for healing. As those of you know who've been here before, this is my attempt to try and bring a little healing to our divided communities, our divided countries, our divided world, our divided selves as we face some uncertainty in this country, but I think also just division, even more than uncertainty, around the world. Now, there's only so much that one person can do. And I think one of the things we've learned quite well in getting to this divisive spot that we find ourselves is that telling somebody else what they should do and what they should believe is not a very productive process. Sometimes we have to, but it doesn't tend to build bonds between people. It tends to build division. And so, as a storyteller, particularly as a spiritual storyteller, someone interested in healing and transformation, it seemed to me that the thing to do was to start to tell stories about healing, start to tell stories about how things can actually grow and improve and be transformed, be healed. Um, Without telling people you got to do this or you got to do that. Now, when I first had this idea, which was almost exactly a day ago, just a little bit more than a day ago, the first thing that occurred to me is, well, what I really ought to do is tell a story a couple times a day, get us through election week into the weekend, and then see what happens. And a dear friend of mine suggested that I should invite other people to tell stories. And that was a great idea. I thought, sure, let's do that. I wonder how many people I can find. And as of now, we now have 25 storytellers who are prepared to come in for a brief 15, 20-minute time. None of our go lives will be more than a half hour long. Most will be much less. And to share a story of healing. And those storytellers are coming to us from the most amazing places. They're certainly coming from around our country, no question. Most of them are. But we have storytellers from Hungary, from Mexico, from India, from Singapore. It's amazing the number of people who have risen to this opportunity and have felt drawn to tell stories of healing. So please do stop by here every day at 2:30 in the afternoon or 8 in the evening, East Coast time. Right now, we are thoroughly booked for all of this coming week and all but 2 or 3 slots for the next week. And then we're already booking people into the third week. So please, please do come back, bring your friends, but most importantly, bring your heart ready to be opened. And let's just see what we can learn from some stories of healing. Now, again, if you've been to the past couple of events of tellings, you know that while I prefer stories, or my foundation is in Jewish stories, I've turned 2 out of 3 times to stories outside of the Jewish tradition. So today I'm going to, or this for this story, I'm going to choose another Jewish story. Now, as I mentioned in the previous story, one of the challenges, particularly it seems around Jewish stories, is that the name of the story gives away the ending, which is really nice if you're a storyteller trying to find the right story, because you look at the name, you say, oh yeah, it's that one. That's how it ends up. But it makes it really difficult to announce the name of the story before you tell it. So I won't be telling you the name until the end of the story, at which point it'll be pretty obvious. But I do want to say that this is a traditional Jewish story. It comes to me by way of Howard Schwartz, who's just a tremendous collector and storyteller and researcher, and just an amazing person from one of his many compendium of books on Jewish stories. And so, with that, let me begin. This story takes place in Eastern Europe, as many of this genre do. And it's about a particular fellow. It starts with this particular fellow. His name, let's say, is Menachem. And Menachem was a breeder and a someone who took care of horses. Horses were a valuable commodity, and as anyone who's dealt with horses knows, you want to have a certain feel for horses in order to keep them calm and push them when they need to be pushed and help them adapt to life in either on the farm or whatever role they might have to take. And Menachem had just a tremendous stable of horses. He treated them very well, and he was well known and respected throughout the community for the fine work that he did. And Menachem had a small family, a wife and a daughter. His daughter name was Rinah, and together they uh, lived together. They raised the horses. They had help, of course, but this was their stable, their mission. And Menachem was also a very good man in many other ways, which was shown through in his treatment of his horses. Um, and that was made most evident when one day he saw across the field a young man, an old boy maybe, walking towards him in clearly some kind of problem he was having. He was limping, he was punched over. And for a young boy, it was really quite remarkable how much pain he seemed to be in. So naturally, Menachem ran out to see what he could do, see if everything was okay. And as he got there, this young boy, who turned out to be maybe 15 years old, kind of collapsed at his feet. And he reached down and he could feel the heat of the fever coming from him. And his legs seemed twisted somehow. Just a young boy in terrible, terrible physical shape. Well, he picked him up, big, strong man that Menachem was, and carried him back to their house, where he and his wife, Chava, tended for him. And it took quite a while. There were days when they weren't sure that this young boy was going to make it. Until finally, many, many days later, he began to stir and sit up and even speak. And they asked him his name. What's your name? He says, I'm Chaim. Means life. I'm Chaim. And there was something about the way he said it that they knew not to ask more about how he had come to them. And so they took him in. It was going to be quite a while before he had his strength back, that was clear. And they had grown attached to him in all this time of recovery. In fact, their daughter, Rinah, had been quite drawn to him, was anxious to bring him cool cloths or a sponge to suck on, his first bowl of soup. And so Chaim came to live with them and slowly regained his strength. He was able to move out into the field with the horses at a distance. But when he did, the horses seemed to sense this really wonderful, loving spirit that he had. And they would come over to him and nuzzle him. And it was very clear that there was a relationship that he could easily form with all of the horses. And so Menachem decided to let that flourish and gave him more and more responsibilities with the horses. And as time went by, his responsibilities grew because his strength grew. And while he was always seemed to be a little challenged, his gait was never steady, his health was never excellent, he grew strong. And so it continued this way. And between Rinah and Chaim, there formed this just wonderful, loving relationship as an older brother to a younger sister. It was strong in their hearts. She cared for him and he cared for her, and the family loved him. And really, it was a wonderful, wonderful circumstance. All because Menachem had had the courage to pick up this feverish, injured boy and take him back and bring him back to the home for healing. Now, I wish I could say it ended there with a happy note, but it doesn't. You see, those injuries and the illness that Chaim had endured, well, they came back. And who knows for what reasons, but suddenly one day he was on the decline. And his health just started to plummet. Their best efforts were really unable to do much. I mean, they called in all the healers they could. They brought all the medicines they could. They showered him with as much love as they could, but he really just couldn't make it. And he passed away. Of course, they were all heartbroken. Rinah, the daughter, more than anyone else. And in fact, she was so distraught at his demise that she herself began to lose her health. And she couldn't get out of bed. Menachem, her father, would come and sit with her all night, wiping her brow, speaking words to her when she was lucid, and praying and praying and praying for his daughter's recovery. And there were long nights and there were weary nights, and sometimes he would sleep. And one night he fell asleep and he dreamed. And in that dream, who was waiting for him there but Chaim? Chaim. And somehow Menachem knew it was a dream, but still he was stunned to see Chaim, because not only was he in his dream, but he was in full health. I mean, his legs were unbent. His strength was obvious, and even he shone with this joy. And he said, Chaim, Chaim, this is amazing. This is amazing. What has happened to you? And Chaim said, after I died, the Holy One noticed how lovingly I had cared for the horses and how much I cared for everyone. And so I was assigned the duty of caring for the horses of the tzaddikim, the holy ones. And I get to live in the Garden of Eden. Oh, it's wonderful. It's so wonderful. And you, Menachem, how are things with you? I'm sad to say, Chaim, Rinah is ill. Ill? Her heart is broken, Chaim. I fear she may be leaving us very soon. Chaim said, wait, no, I can help. Wait here. And he disappeared. And he came back, and in his hands were leaves. So strange and so beautiful. Menachem could smell them in his dream. They were nothing like he'd ever seen before. So what are those, Chaim? What are those? Well, these are leaves from the Garden of Eden. Take them. Boil them up into a tea, into a soup, and give them to Rinah, and she will recover. And in some part of his mind, Menachem knew this was just a dream, and he worried, how was he ever going to do this? And when he opened his eyes, the dream was over. He was back in the room. And he looked, and the window had blown open. And there, covering Rinah's bed were leaves. Those very same leaves. Well, they almost yelled. He grabbed them up. He ran into the kitchen and he started crushing them and making a tea and then making a soup. And his wife, Chava, she ran out. And he told her everything was happening, but he had to get the tea to her quickly. And it wasn't 3 days before Rinah was recovered. And they all gave great thanks for Chaim and his gift of life to Rinah. And you might think the story ends there. But there's one beautiful postscript. And that is that while Rinah fully recovered, and when she grew to be of marriageable age, you know, she met a man and they made a very good match. And their first child was a son. And they named him Chaim. Okay. Well, thank you all very much. Now, we're not done because we actually have 2 stories for you tonight. Rinah, I'm going to ask you to unmute, and I'd be happy to have you tell a story if you're ready.
So I'm sorry it's a little dark here, but so something really beautiful happened earlier today that I want to talk to you about, especially as we're so close to a very momentous election day. And we had a gathering earlier, actually 2 gatherings. And the first were weavers and artists and magic makers who were gathering to create a new world and a new energy and dispel some of the negativity that is just sort of swirling around us in this season, in this election time where everything is so polarized. And there was a woman on the call who took yarn and it was like a jute rope, you know, it was very brittle. And she got out, I don't even know how to describe it, but it almost looked like these 2 plates. And she mushed and she pressed and compressed this jute, this brittle rope together. And she did this for a half hour, maybe 45 minutes. And suddenly this brittle rope of bigotry and hatred and fear became soft, pliable. You know, it's like she was felting, she was carding. And then once all of this brittle rope had been softened and it became like a puff, she then gathered it together with new strands of beautiful colored wool, and she started to reweave you know, like a string or a cord. And that cord was to symbolize this new energy that so many of us, millions of us, are birthing into the world, which is cords of love and peace and harmony and protection. And at the same time that she was doing this, there was another woman on the call who was singing and chanting. And she was welcoming in the ancestors. She was welcoming in healthy ancestors. And she was welcoming in spirits from the directions, you know, the one in the many and the many in the one. And she was singing to us. And there was another woman on the call who was painting one of the most beautiful pictures of watercolor, and all of the colors were bleeding in together, and it just looked like a new cosmos. And so that call lasted. It was like we were raising the energy and inviting in all of the forces of healing that are needed to transform our world at this moment. And then we moved into another call where people all over the world came together to create a vision. And this is a different kind of storytelling than my wonderful Magid brother Jim does. What we did is we created the story, just like the weaving of the cloth. We created a vision together, and it was a story of a new world. And we imagined first that there was this cord of light descending down from the heavens and going in through our crown and fusing with our spine and going into the earth. And as this cord of light from the heavens went into the earth, it separated into roots that were deep and wide that could hold the entire earth together. And then we brought up that energy through our body, sending it back up to the heavens. And when it reached the heavens, that cord of light became branches that held on to the stars and the universe, so that each one of us in this beautiful visioning, this beautiful story making, as we create, as we speak, we became like the vessels, like Jacob's ladder, like the eternal Etz Chaim, the tree of life. And those branches were up in the heavens, holding on to the stars and the planets. We had the roots below, far and deep and wide, holding the earth together. And then once we were grounded in this way, we envisioned the Statue of Liberty. And around the Statue of Liberty were waters, and into the waters we poured our prayers for peace, for protection, for love, for healing, for safety, for justice, for care, for community, for saving the earth, for taking care of one another. And we envisioned the waters around this Statue of Liberty spreading and spreading and going into the ocean, touching all parts of the world through the rivers and the streams. And we envisioned the torch that she carries. And suddenly this torch was glowing with light, and the light beamed out and out and out, and it became protection for all of those who are going to be voting on the 3rd, all of those who are feeling unsafe. And this light cloaked them in protection so that they could go into the world and do what needs to be done to make this world better. And so with the waters spreading and reaching everywhere, and the torch of light that is beaming and covering and protecting everyone, and this beautiful cord of light that allows us to walk as the intermediary between heaven and earth, literally holding the heavens and the earth together, we then opened our eyes and realized that what we had just done in this sacred moments or series of moments was we had, together with the Holy One, the one in the many and the many in the one, we had birthed a new world with millions of others, many of whom are strangers to us and yet not. And we had birthed a world together in this moment that was sacred and holy and filled and shaped by love. Ken Yeharatzon.
Amen, amen. Oh, friends, what a wonderful thing we have here. So, thank you, Rinah, for joining us. Thank you very much. I want you all to remember that this is something we're going to do twice a day for at least the next 2 weeks and maybe beyond. And each day you'll hear a couple of different storytellers tell stories. Tomorrow we have really 2 special folks coming. Moya Bumbarak is coming in the afternoon, and then Selena Eisenberg will be joining us in the evening. You can see the schedule up on the Transformational Storytelling page. And I'll also mention that there's a YouTube playlist being formed of all these stories, so that as time goes by, you can go back and catch the ones you missed or rewatch the ones you'd like to see again. Of course, we always invite your comments. and your questions, but most of all, we invite your open hearts and your love. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.